In 1974, the CIA declassified a $20 million research program that had been running in the secret for decades. They called it the Gateway Process, and its purpose was to answer a single question: can human consciousness operate beyond the physical body? They weren't interested in the philosophical or religious aspects of this question. They were looking for measurable, repeatable, operational skills that they could transfer to their special forces to gain a competitive edge in extremely difficult situations. And after years of controlled experiments, millions of dollars, and countless hours of research, they concluded, not only is your consciousness not confined to your skull, but when we are trained to access certain brain states, we can access information beyond our senses. And this can influence outcomes in ways that classical physics never imagined to be possible. You may have heard about flow and other tools to increase your performance state, but what you learn in this video is the missing piece of information that the top training labs are secretly teaching the elite athletes and executives to access unprecedented levels of performance. And here's what makes this story even more interesting. Everything these labs spent millions discovering, well, it had already been mapped thousands of years ago. Tibetan monks, Vedic masters, indigenous healers, they've been practicing these exact techniques for millennia. The same phenomenon, different language, same truth. In this video, I show you exactly how you too can access the benefits of these techniques without investing millions into it. These are the 5 portals that will shift you out of your contractive, survival-based consciousness and bring you into a state of what scientists call expanded state, where your effort seems effortless, where intuition guides you to the right answers timelessly, and where every limiting belief of your past magically disappears to let your highest potential shine. Now, before I show you these 5 portals, you might be wondering, if these techniques are so powerful, if they've been proven by the elite labs and practiced by masters for thousands of years, why haven't you heard about them already? Well, for centuries, this knowledge existed in 2 parallel worlds. In ancient traditions, it was considered sacred, accessible only to monks who dedicated their entire lives to mastering it. In the military and elite institutions, on the other side, it was classified, a competitive advantage too valuable to be shared publicly. And that's why, even when scientists tried to study this openly, they were buried by the establishment. Take Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, for instance, Cambridge-trained biochemist. His TED Talk was banned in 2013, not just criticized, removed from the platform entirely. Why? Well, because he challenged what he calls the dogmas of materialism, the belief that matter is unconscious, that nature is mechanical, and that consciousness is just a byproduct of a brain chemistry. His research on morphic fields, the invisible information networks connecting all the living beings, suggested that something the establishment couldn't accept, that consciousness is fundamental, not incidental. Acknowledging consciousness as primary threatens the entire materialist paradigm. But we are entering a new phase now, a phase where truth can no longer be kept secret. And some people already know this and are building the foundations of the coming economy on the backstage of some of the most influential institutions around the world. I recently spoke to a serial entrepreneur who built billion-dollar companies and led a $30 billion VC firm. And he told me something that confirms all of this. The best investment firms in Silicon Valley already know it. We're not betting on the smartest founders anymore. We're betting on founders operating in full spiritual alignment. Not strategy, not execution only, the inner work. What was once sacred knowledge reserved for monks or classified research hidden in military labs is now emerging into the open. Because we've reached a point where the old paradigm, the belief that we are just sophisticated chemistry sets, can no longer explain what we are experiencing. So here, what connects all of these 5 portals I'm about to show you. Each one shifts you from contracted consciousness, where you believe that you are separate, limited, defined by your past, into expanded consciousness, where you recognize that you are the field of existence itself. Infinite, boundless, creative. Ancient mystics called it samadhi, athletes called it in the zone, and scientists now call it flow. In 1966, Soviet sports psychologist Avi Alexeyev was conducting research on Olympic weightlifters when he stumbled upon something that would revolutionize performance training. He began experimenting with a radical new protocol, having athletes spend the majority of their training time not lifting weights, but lying still with their eyes closed, vividly imagining themselves performing perfect lifts. The result stunned everyone. Athletes who spent 75% of their training time in mental rehearsal and only 25% in physical practice didn't just match the performance of athletes doing 100% physical training. They significantly outperformed them. The Soviet Union, recognizing the strategic advantage, classified this research. For decades, while Western athletes were grinding through endless physical repetition, Soviet Olympians were training primarily in their minds and dominating international competitions. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that this research began leaking into Western sports psychology, and even then it was met with skepticism. How could imagining an action be as effective as actually doing it? Well, the answer came from brain imaging technology. When researchers put athletes into fMRI machines and had them vividly imagine performing their sport, something remarkable showed up on the scans. The same motor cortex regions activated as when they physically performed the action. The brain couldn't distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. But it goes deeper than just neural activation. For thousands of years, Tibetan monks practiced what they called dream yoga, visualizing deities and mandalas in such vivid detail that their bodies responded as if the experience were real. They weren't training for athletic performance, of course. They were training consciousness itself to operate beyond the limitations of linear time. What the Soviets had discovered through systematic research, the Tibetans had known through direct experience. Your consciousness isn't bound to now. When you vividly rehearse a future event in theta brainwaves, the twilight zone right before sleep, where your critical mind goes offline, you're not just laying down neural pathways, you're collapsing probability fields at the quantum level. You're accessing infinite possibilities and selecting an outcome. Michael Phelps' coach, Bob Bowman, understood this very well. Starting when Phelps was a teenager, Bowman had him watch what he called his mental videotape, twice a day, once before bed and once upon waking up. But Bowman didn't just have Phelps visualize perfect races, he had him rehearse problems, goggles break-ins mid-race, a bad start, equipment failure, and Beijing Olympics 2008 200 meters butterfly finals, Phelps dove into the water and within seconds his goggles become filling with water. By the final lap he couldn't see anything, complete darkness. In that moment, with an Olympic gold medal on the line, most athletes would panic, but Phelps didn't. He'd swum this exact race blind hundreds of times in his mind. He knew exactly how many strokes it took to reach the wall. And he touched first, gold medal, and he won the world record. This is why the Navy SEALs now have mandatory mental rehearsing training. They didn't call it visualizations or meditations, they call it operational preparation. Before every mission, SEALs mentally rehearse every scenario, every decision point, every potential crisis. Studies show that this reduces the panic response by 50% and increases decision-making speed under fire. Mental rehearsal isn't just visualization or positive thinking, it's accessing known linear time. And elite performers, whether they're Olympians, special forces operators, or the founders of billion-dollar companies, they practice this in their minds 10 times more than they practice physically, because they understand something that the rest of us are only beginning to grasp. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between a real experience and a vividly imagined one. And when you rehearse in expanded state of consciousness, you're not just preparing for the future, you're actively creating it. In 2014, researchers at the Radboud University prepared to inject Wim Hof with bacterial endotoxins, a substance guaranteed to trigger massive inflammatory responses in any human being. The autonomic nervous system's fight or flight response is supposed to do exactly that. Be autonomic, so beyond your conscious control. But Wim Hof claimed that he consciously controlled his immune responses through breathwork alone. The scientific community was skeptical, so they injected him and monitored what happened. His inflammatory markers barely moved. Through specific breathing patterns, Hof had consciously suppressed what should have been an overwhelming immune response. Then, to prove it wasn't just a unique anomaly, Hof trained 12 other volunteers in the same method and repeated the experiment. Same results. The study was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It should have revolutionized medicine. Instead, it was quietly acknowledged and largely ignored. Because if breath, something free and accessible to everyone, could override the autonomic nervous system, it threatened the fundamental assumptions about how the body works and what treatments are necessary. But 5,000 years ago, Yogis already mapped this territory. They called it pranayama, the control of prana or life force. They weren't interested in suppressing immune responses to endotoxins, of course. They were interested in something much, much deeper. Using breath as a bridge between the material body and consciousness itself. Tibetan monks took it even further with Tummo breathing, the practice of generating inner fire. Western researchers visiting Himalayas monasteries documented monks sitting in sub-zero temperatures, drying wet sheets wrapped around their naked bodies, using only breathwork and meditation. And when Harvard researcher Dr. Herbert Benson studied these practitioners in the 80s, he found that they could raise their body temperature by up to 17 degrees Fahrenheit through breathwork alone, not through increased metabolism, through directing consciousness. And once again, the military was paying attention. And today, Navy SEALs undergo mandatory breathwork training before every single mission, during crisis situations and in combat. The HeartMath Institute's research revealed why this works. Breath directly activates the vagus nerve, the major nerve controlling your stress response, heart rate, and inflammation. When you control your breath with specific patterns, you're not just calming yourself down, you're actively switching your nervous system's operational mode. And here's what makes this profound. The autonomic nervous system, it's what keeps you identified with the body, convinced that you are separate, limited, vulnerable. But when you override it with the breath, you're not just managing stress, you're dissolving the primary mechanism that maintains your contracted consciousness. Fear dissolves, limitations disappear, and the impossible becomes simply what hasn't happened yet. Now, here's when it really gets interesting, because everything I've shown you this far is just the primary layer most people access. But there's a further layer that explains why some people apply these techniques and break through, while others apply the exact same protocols, but they remain stuck. The missing piece isn't just about learning more, it's about releasing what's already locked inside of you. LeBron James spends $1.5 million per year on recovery, fascia release, cryotherapy, hyperbaric chambers. Why? Because elite performers understand something that the rest of us are only beginning to grasp. Your body isn't just a machine that needs fuel. It's an energetic system that stores everything, every experience, every emotion, every unprocessed moment. It gets connected, not just in your brain, but in your fascia, the connective tissue that wraps every muscle, every organ, and every cell in your body. And when that energy stays trapped, it drains your battery before you even start. I made an entire video breaking down what I call the anatomy of unsuccess, why 90 to 97% of your actions run on autopilot, and why that autopilot is fighting against you. If you haven't watched it yet, the link is in the description. So here's the core truth. You're not failing because you lack discipline. You're failing because you're hiking a mountain with rocks in your backpack and you don't even know that you're carrying them. Every limiting belief installed in childhood, it creates what researchers call the energetic blocks in your fascia. These are knots, tension, stuck charge. And Dr. James Oschman, author of The Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis, documented exactly how the fascia functions as a semiconductor network. It's not just a structural support. It's an information highway, a bioelectric matrix that stores charge and memory throughout your entire body. Yogis, of course, knew this 5,000 years ago. They called it prana, chi, life force. Yoga asanas, what the West calls stretching, were actually designed specifically to release trapped charge in your fascia, to restore the flow, to unblock the energetic system so that consciousness could operate freely. And acupuncture? Well, same principle. It's treating the bioelectric meridians. Western scientists dismissed it as a placebo until they actually measured the electrical conductivity of the acupuncture points. Turns out they're real, they're measurable, and they correspond exactly to the fascia network that Dr. Oschman mapped. So here's why some people can adopt new habits like drinking a glass of water while others remain stuck for years. Well, because you're unconsciously running belief systems that are installed by trauma. I have to work hard to deserve success. If I relax, something bad will happen. I'm not good enough yet. Well, all of these aren't just thoughts. They are electromagnetic patterns that are stored in your tissue. And until you don't release them, your system will keep defaulting back to them. And this happens because it's trying to protect you from threats that no longer exist. And elite performers know exactly this. That's why they don't just hire trainers or strategists. They hire somatic therapists, trauma specialists, energy workers. They know that if they remove the rocks first, then the climb becomes effortless. Then you can't out-discipline trauma. You can't hack your way around the energetic blocks. Cleaning the field is the prerequisite for real transformation, and everything else is just layering new information on top of old surface. In 1996, a neuroscientist named Dr. Bruce Lipton published research that should have overturned biology textbooks worldwide. He demonstrated that cells don't just respond to chemical signals, they respond to consciousness. He took identical stem cells and placed them in different environments, different bioelectrical fields and different chemical baths, different information inputs basically. And genetically identical cells, same DNA, but depending on the environment, some became bone cells, others became muscle cells, others yet became fat cells. The conclusion was unavoidable. Genes don't control your biology, consciousness does. Your beliefs about yourself, about what's possible, about who you are, directly shape your cellular function. But there's a reason why this matters so much. Because if your biology responds to consciousness, then the beliefs you carry aren't just limiting your mindset. They are actually limiting your physiology, your cellular function, your actual capacity to perform. And remember, up to 97% of your daily behaviors, thoughts and reactions are running on subconscious programming, like an autopilot. And most of them are installed before you were even 7 years old. And that's when your brain operates primarily on theta state, the same brainwave frequency that hypnotherapists use to install new patterns. Every "you cannot," every "that's impossible," every "who do you think you are" has been slowly absorbed by your subconscious mind, and it's now running your life. This is why willpower often fails, because you're not fighting laziness, you're actually fighting an identity structure installed decades ago by someone else's fear. Tiger Woods understood this well before he could even walk. His father, Earl Woods, worked with a hypnotherapist to train Tiger from age 3, not to improve his golf swing, to install identity at the subconscious level. Before doubt could form, before limitation could take root, they weren't programming him to believe "I can." That's just surface level. They were dissolving the concept of separation between Tiger and the game. In theta state, there is no Tiger trying to win. There is only flow, only expression, only winning. Ancient yogis called this yoga nidra, conscious awareness suspended between waking and sleep. In that state, you're not just trying to change who you are recognizing that who you are was never fixed to begin with. It's just a story, and stories can be rewritten. In 2004, a research team at the National Institute of Health placed experienced meditators into brain scanners and asked them to enter what Buddhists called samadhi, complete absorption. No subject, no object, no meditator, no meditation, just pure awareness. And what showed up on the scans stunned the neuroscientists. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for your sense of self, for planning, for the voice that narrates your life, it went completely dark. Not damaged, not suppressed, just purely offline. This phenomenon has a name, and it's called transient hypofrontality. Basically, your ego temporarily shuts down, and when it does, performance jumps up to 500%. And this isn't speculation. The Flow Genome Project has spent 20 years documenting this across elite athletes, Navy SEALs, creative geniuses, and breakthrough innovators. When you, the self-conscious, doubting, narrating voice, gets out of the way, capability skyrockets. Because that voice, in the end, it's actually the bottleneck. Athletes call it in the zone, the moment where time slows, where the basket looks massive, where every moment feels inevitable. Mystics call it enlightenment. Same state, different language, but here's what they all agree on. In that state, there is no you performing, there is just performance. No separation between the actor and the action. You're not just playing the game, you are the game. Zen masters spent lifetimes training for what they called mushin, the no-mind state. Consciousness without self-referential filter, without the voice asking, am I doing the right thing? What will people think? Can I keep this up? And every time that you identified with that voice, you drop out of flow, you contract, you fight reality instead of moving with it. The HeartMath Institute is the one who discovered the physiological mechanism behind this. When your heart rhythm enters coherence, like a smooth, ordered sine wave patterns, your brain synchronizes as well. Your nervous system calms down, and your access to intuition, creativity, and decision-making intelligence jumps exponentially. But here, what it may seem contradictory, you can't force coherence. You can't think your way into it. It happens when you stop trying, when you stop identifying as the separate self trying to control the outcome. Flow isn't something you do, it's what happens when you step aside. When you dissolve the boundary between self and field, you don't just perform better, you access intelligence that wasn't always there, intuition that knows before thinking, timing that moves before deciding. The ancient traditions didn't call this supernatural, they just called it your natural state. The operating system you were born with before conditioning taught you to believe that you're separate, that you're limited and vulnerable. And here's the truth that elite performers live by. Every limiting belief that you carry, every doubt, every fear isn't just the voice of contracted consciousness, the survival self, the ego trying to keep you safe by keeping you small. But you're not small. You were never small. You are the field itself, temporarily convinced it's just a wave. And when you remember that, not intellectually but experientially in your body, in your nervous system, in the silence between thoughts, that's when the impossible stops being impossible. That's when you stop performing and you start flowing. That's when you stop trying to be great and simply are. The materialist paradigm is collapsing. The old model that consciousness is an accident of matter is breaking down under the weight of evidence. And what's emerging is what was always true. Consciousness is primary, matter is secondary. You are not in the universe. The universe is in you. And Silicon Valley billionaires are hiring shamans, Navy SEALs are practicing pranayama, Olympic athletes are training in theta waves. The question isn't whether this works anymore. The question is, when will you stop pretending you don't already know this? Because deep down, you felt it. Those moments when time disappeared, when you knew something before you could even explain it, when the impossible became just inevitable. That wasn't luck. That wasn't talent, that was you, briefly remembering what you actually are. So here's my question to you. What would change if you stopped trying to optimize the chemistry set and started working with the electrical system? What would happen if you released the rocks that you've been carrying all along and let your full battery come online? What becomes possible when you stop identifying as the limited self and start operating as the field itself? These aren't rhetorical questions, these are invitations, because these portals are open to everyone willing to walk through them. The research is published, the techniques are accessible, and the only thing standing between you and expanded consciousness is the belief that you're not ready for it. But you don't need to become something new. You just need to remember what you've always been. Consciousness doesn't need training, it needs recognition. And once you see it, once you feel it, once you experience yourself as the field instead of the wave, well, you can't unsee it. And that's when everything that I've shared stops being pure information but becomes lived experience, lived reality. That's when the impossible becomes your baseline. And if you're ready to go deeper, join us at Whole Grain Wisdom, where we are building the next generation of founders, what I call the quantum founders, who operate from the deepest alignment and flow, not perishable willpower. Link in the description. Now, welcome to the next level.